Hi and welcome back to my channel. I'm Simon and today I'm back with one of my favourite videos to make, although I also find it quite nerve-wracking, and one of my favourite videos to watch on other channels once I've made my own, because I don't like to be swayed in any way, and that is my predictions of what the shortlist for the Women's Prize for Fiction will be this year. Now, before we go into my thoughts on the 16 books and which 6 I would pick if I was to be a judge, which sadly I never will be. However, I always have hope for my mother, and we'll come to her in a minute because she's not here and that feels quite strange. I wanted to say that because I have made 3 hour-long-ish vlogs of the reading journey, reading all of the long list this year, to varying different degrees, responses, the whole gamut. I'll link them all down below. I'm going to try and be quite short and snappy with these and kind of give you a pitch and then how I feel like they match to the criteria of originality, excellence and accessibility, plus what I loved and maybe some of the things that I wasn't so sure about with some of them. It was harder than I expected, I will say that. I think I had about 8 or 9 that I felt could have been shortlisted that I'd read. So that's like 2/3 or ish. And I think that's pretty good. Or is that not? No, my maths are dreadful. That's just over half. Moving on to the other thing that I was just going to mention is that my mum is not here. We have done this together for the last few years, and I am using the trusty old method of the post-it note on the back of the book saying yes or no with some asterisks. No, asterisks. Asterisks would be quite a different thing, as I have a few points that I want to talk about because, like I said, there was some real almost spoil the shortlist for me, and one that I have shortlisted which I'm still a little bit like that about. I think that's the technical term. I'm a bit like that about it. But Mum is not here, and that's because this year she's been reading the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction long list in its inaugural year, and she's had the best time. I don't know about you, but she's made me so excited for the shortlisted books, and me and Mum will be reunited on all things Women's Prizey at the sort of end of May, beginning of June, to go through both shortlists and put our books in order of preference and then predict our winners before the big finale. And that's also one of the reasons why I put these books in alphabetical order of author surname, because I didn't want to do it in order of preference, because I'm going to save that magic for later. Plus, I find it very unlikely, because it's never happened before, that myself and the judges have the same shortlist. But anyway, let's get to the first book, which is Maya Biniyam's Hangman. I adore this cover. I think it's incredible. Sadly, this book wasn't quite for me. It's about a man who one day is told he needs to get on a plane, which he does, and then some really weird things happen on the plane, and then he gets to another country and then starts to meet strangers who sometimes aren't strangers, who start to tell him all of their strange and wonderful stories. He's a bit like a story magnet, and I found that slightly confusing and discombobulated, which links to accessibility. I didn't think it was always 100% accessible. I did quite like the quirky nature of it. However, it started to become a bit, I can't say repetitive because all the stories were different, but it felt a bit cyclical. And then originality, totally, I just wasn't quite in the mood for it either. And that's something that I have tried to take into account as I've been reading, because different books match different moods. So it was a DNF for now. If it's on the shortlist, I'll definitely read it before the winner is announced. And actually, I think I will head back to this book at some point anyway. Is it on my shortlist? Sadly, it's a no from me, but I think if I read it at the right time, I'll really get into it. There has been a lot of discussion about that book's ending, suddenly making everything make sense, but for me, that's also a bit of a question mark / quibble, because you need to get to an ending of a book, or want to get to an ending of a book, in order for that to work. On to the second book, In Defense of the Act by Effie Black, which is about a woman who is studying the suicide of animals, and really from the beginning of the book we find out why that is with 2 particular incidences in her life. And what I thought was incredible about this book was how it dealt with such a difficult topic, but did it in such a honest, frank, and it sounds weird to use this word, but very warm way. The book is very wry. It's also about her coming out as a lesbian, so there's this wonderful look at what it's like to be I say wonderful, it's kind of tricky sometimes too. There's this really frank, brilliant, warm again, insight into what it's like to be a queer woman now. There was a scene set with a book club that was just absolutely brilliant, and that scene made me feel seen. So in terms of accessibility, completely, I thought this was a really accessible novel into a very, very difficult subject, and also the scientific elements and what she's trying to say with that, I think, is all done really deftly. In terms of excellence, I thought the writing was brilliant. Well, there were a few dialogue moments that I questioned, but I sort of forgave it that. And then in terms of originality, I did think it was a pretty original book. I've never seen this particular subject matter written about in this way, or actually any really tough subject matters written about quite in this way. So for me, absolutely yes, this would be on my shortlist. Then we have And Then She Fell by Alysia Elliot, another book that I should say that I hadn't heard of. I hadn't heard of In Defence of the Act. I'd heard a few mutterings about Hangman, but it wasn't on my predictions video because I predicted absolutely zero right. I was really excited when I saw this on the long list. I want to read a lot more Canadian fiction because when I do, I really enjoy it. And I also was intrigued by this being both a novel of an Indigenous woman kind of becoming part of a middle-class white suburban life, but also with the fact that she's dealing with postpartum psychosis, and therefore there are elements of horror and the really surreal and quite menacing sometimes that are woven in. So very different reading experience for me. I haven't read much horror before, so for me it felt really original in the way it was done. However, maybe if you're someone who's a real like horror lover, this might feel like a bit basic, but that links into accessibility because I did find it really accessible. The writing I thought was great. I think maybe sometimes it was a little tiny bit overwritten, but that's literally me picking holes at it. Now this may be a shock because when it comes to would I shortlist it, the answer for me is no, but I have got the star / asterisk, not asterisk. This was so close. There were 5 books that I would put forward without even thinking about, and then the rest of them with the asterisks, as you'll see, are ones that I could have made a 6th book on any other given day. And that to me is what I have loved about reading the long list. It's introduced me to some great books. I wouldn't probably have heard of this maybe ever if it had been on the long list, and now I really want to go and read Alysia Elliot's non-fiction book. So there we go. Then we have The Wren by Anne Enright, which I have to admit I wasn't massively looking forward to, as I have had a bit of a wobbly reading relationship with Anne Enright before. I have found some beautiful writing within her books, but overall I've sometimes found them a bit melodramatic. This is about Nell, who is going through a really difficult relationship and also sort of really struggling to find herself, and the relationship with her mother, who was the son of a really famous poet and had a very difficult relationship with her father, and has also become quite dependent on the love of her daughter, I would say, but had a difficult experience bringing her up. I loved this, absolutely. It really surprised me. I was completely drawn in by Nell's opening section because the book does switch between the two of them, and then actually at one point it does go to Carl's father. I thought Nell's, well, again, going back to excellent writing, I love the vignette style. I love the way she writes about this almost obsession in a relationship that's just really not good for you, which reminded me of Sheena Patel's amazing I'm a Fan. It reminded me a lot of Alice Smith in terms of the way that Anne Enright was playing with words in this really joyful way. And some of the paragraphs and sentences were just stunning. So for me, this was a surprise. Yes, I absolutely loved it. Next up we have The Maiden by Kate Forster, which I kind of feel like I want to apologise slightly for. I've just realised I haven't actually rated that last one against all the criteria. So, in terms of accessibility, I didn't like the first page or so, but after that I was totally into it with Nell and the vignettes. And then in terms of excellent writing, yes, I thought it was absolutely phenomenal writing. It felt like every word had to earn its place. In terms of originality, less so, because I think these relationships between mothers and daughters, fathers and daughters, mothers and sons, etc., and we'll come to one of those in a bit, that I feel is done a lot in fiction. However, that said, as I discovered as I was reading all the books, the originality question is a really tough one because there isn't much new under the sun, to be fair. But yeah, I guess that would be where it would lose marks for me. But as I said, it's a yes, that would be on my shortlist. Now, back to the Maiden and what I was about to apologise for, because I do feel like I gave this book a little bit of a kicking from the off, as I really don't like the cover. I think they've missed a trick here as well, because the Maiden isn't actually this woman here. It's the guillotine here. And I had never heard of the phrase kissing the maiden, which was where people who were from the upper classes and aristocracy were executed by guillotine. That's what they called it. And this is based on a true case of that. And Kate looks at what maybe really happened, and I was completely into this book. It really gripped me. Well, it's a romp in a lot of ways, even though it's got quite a heavy subject matter, being murder. I loved the characters. I thought Christian, the maiden on the front who, well, may or may not have killed someone, I enjoyed her part, but I will say that there was sometimes a few issues with the time slipping with her, because not only do we alternate between her and another character, Violet, who is brilliant and a bawdy, wonderful character, although I felt like I maybe had read her before. I sometimes got confused when we were within Christian's past, or when we were going forward post her having been sentenced to be beheaded. But in terms of the criteria, accessibility, absolutely. I completely got absolutely absorbed in this book. There were those few time slip moments that I mentioned. In terms of originality, I feel like I have read this before. Not this book, obviously, but I feel like true crime, true historical crimes being turned into fiction is quite a popular thing. And I did feel like Violet was a great character, but I had read her in a lot of other historical novels. What's the other one? Excellence. I think the writing's really good. Again, I felt there were a few tropes that had been done before, and I didn't feel like they were done 100% differently, but I still really, really enjoyed this book, and will definitely be reading whatever Kate Foster writes next. Would it go on the shortlist for me? The answer is no, but I did put an asterisk because I put a star because I did really, really enjoy it. It was an absolute romp and I flew through it. Then we have the book that I have to admit I am only halfway through, and that is Brotherless Night by V.V. Ganeshananthan. This book is all about a woman who is telling us the story of how she became what we would call a terrorist, and why, and what happened in the 1980s onwards in Sri Lanka that she witnessed and was part of, and how she ended up in that situation. I'd heard amazing things about it. I do think it is fantastically written. It's very detailed, but at the same time you don't feel like you're sort of being... Well, it's detailed without being heavy. It's got a real propulsion to it. And I think the mixture of telling the reader what was going on whilst also losing them in the story is done absolutely fantastically. So in terms of writing, I would say yes, definitely excellent. In terms of originality, it is giving slight vibes of Home Fires by Camilla Shamsi, but that's not a bad thing. That won the Women's Prize. In terms of accessibility, as someone who really did not know very much about that period of history in Sri Lanka or the Tamil Tigers or what was going on, I am totally there. So for me, unquestionably, this is a yes, even though I haven't finished it. Then we have Restless, Dolly, Maunder by Kate Grenville. Now, Kate Grenville is an author I've read previously and absolutely loved. This is a fictionalised account of her grandmother's life and how Dolly was brought up very much in not just a society but a family where women didn't work and they didn't need to have aspirations, but she does, and we follow her on that journey, which is a restless one. She moves around a lot. I sadly felt this was lacking the depth that it needed. So in terms of originality, I think the concept is really original, although actually, that said, Kate's, might not have been a previous book, but the one before that was a non-fiction book about her mother's life, and I was kind of thinking this would have actually worked better possibly as non-fiction. I just found that whenever there was a big historical moment, Dolly didn't really think about it, with the exception of two that really, really hit close to home. The rest of everything just doesn't seem to matter so much, and I found that quite odd. I wanted more, I think. So in terms of writing, for me, this felt mildly, not clinical, but I just felt very distant from it, and it didn't have the life and the density that I have experienced with her writing before. In terms of excellence, not so great. Accessibility, absolutely. If you want to find out about what it was like for a woman at that time, then I would say this is great for that. Would it be on my shortlist? Sadly, it's a no from me. And that does come with a heavy heart because I have read her and absolutely loved her before. I need to whiz on faster, don't I? I don't think I'm even halfway through yet. Isabella Hammad's Enter Ghost. I feel like this is one that has been talked about the most. It's a book that looks at what has happened with Israel and Palestine in the past from 1948 onwards to the First and Second Intifada. We meet a young woman who is an actress who goes over to Israel to see her sister and ends up being part of the rehearsals for a version of Hamlet that's going to be put on in the West Bank. In terms of excellence, I do think this is such a brilliantly written book. Some of it is told through scripts as the cast are rehearsing, and there's also this brilliant introduction partly to Hamlet, which is very sort of info dumpy but done in a really great way, and then you also get sort of these bios, almost like you're flicking through a brochure of each of the cast and their history, and giving us a really different insight into many different Palestinian experiences, and I thought that was done brilliantly. That said, the script sometimes gives you a real distance at the same time. So accessibility wise, I had a bit of a question mark around that, but I do think it is a brilliant book. I think it's an important book. I sometimes found it a little bit too heavy and that I wasn't quite as invested as I wanted to be, which sounds harsh, but taking all that into account, would it be on my personal shortlist? Yes, it would. And that comes with an asterisk too, because this was my 6th book. There are 5 others where I was like definite, and this one was a bit more of a wobble for me, so it'll be interesting to see what the judges pick. Then we have Soldier Sailor, which has become absolutely beloved by most of BookTube and a lot of Bookstagram from what I can see. This is about a woman who has had a son, and her marriage is a bit tricky. There's a lot of strain on it, partly because of having a child, but there's also other reasons behind that. And we follow kind of at first her real stream of consciousness as she's having pretty much a bit of a breakdown, to be honest. I, for some reason, didn't want to like this book. I don't know why. Do you ever get that irrational thing where you're just like, no, I'm not sure? However, once I got into it, I really, really liked it. I did find it a little bit repetitive. I think the prose is absolutely stunning, I should say, and like in terms of excellence, yes. In terms of accessibility, I did find the beginning a little bit confusing with when she goes off in the car and off in the brambles. I won't spoil it for anyone who's not read it yet. In terms of originality, again, like I mentioned before, sometimes with these mother and child stories, I feel like it's been really, really done. And I did find at the beginning, I was like, oh, this is really saccharine and I'm not going to love it, but that did go away in the end. Now, this is going to be controversial because would it be on my shortlist? No. But you've got the star, which means it was like so close, mainly because the writing is stunning. There are some really funny bits as well, which you don't expect, which I liked and made me sort of wryly smile. It's a no, but I have a feeling this will be on the shortlist. Hence why I think that my shortlist and the judges' shortlist will be quite different. Mainly it's because of that book. Then we have River East, River West by Aubrey Lescure, which is the first book I read from the long list, which feels like a very long time ago, but I think it's only about 4 weeks. It's about a young woman who is telling us that her mother has been stolen by this man, Lu Fang. And it turns out that actually her mother has married Lu Fang. And we follow on with her story as a young Chinese American girl going to American school in China, and then we get to know more about Lu Fang and their story and his past, and those two stories alternate. It's really hard to sum a book up in one sentence, I'm just saying. I should say the young woman is called Alva, and I didn't get as into her storyline as I did Lu Fang's. I found his, I guess, more interesting in terms of historical context and the things that I learned. There's one particular story around his past that I can't share because I don't want to spoil it at all, but it literally made my jaw drop. I found Alva's story a little bit more melodramatic, and that might be because, you know, she's a teenage girl going through a lot of stuff, but for me that's sort of, I don't know, in terms of excellence, the two narratives weren't as strong as each other, and I was looking forward to Lu Fang's more than Alva's. In terms of accessibility, I was totally in with this book, and it deals with quite a lot of not only historical elements, although sometimes I did feel they were brushed over a little bit. It did make me think of the Kate Grenville, but the way it looks at cultures coming together, clashing, opposing, I thought that was brilliantly done. And then in terms of originality, I thought it was fairly original. Sadly though, for me, it's another no, but with a star, because again, this was one that I did really, really like and really enjoy. And if it was on the shortlist, I would be more than happy with that, because I thought it was a great book. On to 8 Lives of a Century-Old Trickster by Marianne Lee. So this book opens up in an old people's home where a woman is going around and asking people how they would describe their life in 3 words. She writes obituaries. And one woman she meets, Ms. Mook, is like, I can't do that. I can't do 3 words. I can do 8. And then she tells her life story through 8 different words or 8 different lives as she sees them. And I just got completely lost in this straight away. I mean, I love books set in old people's home, and it's not really, but that was a great opener for me. I thought the way it looked at what the history of Korea and North and South Korea was absolutely phenomenal. It's incredibly hard to read sometimes. There's some really confronting stuff in here, but I thought it was handled just so well. Like, it is honest and raw and unflinching and uncomfortable, but it needs to be. I also loved, and if we're talking about excellence with writing, I loved how it was like a patchwork novel, so the lives don't come in chronological order, although towards the end they sort of did, and I kind of wish that had been mixed up a little bit more. I thought it was really original, I thought it was really accessible, and yeah, I just really loved this, so no brainer. It's an absolute yes from me. I don't know how many more yeses I've got, actually. I think it might just be 1, and yet we've got 5 books to go, so let's get through them quickly. Right. The Blue Beautiful World by Karen Lord. This, sadly for me, was a DNF, a very early on DNF, well, I say like 50 pages in. This is a first contact novel. It's a sci-fi novel, it's a climate change novel, it's about a pop star who can possibly save the world. I only know all of that. Oh, it's the DNF alarm. I should be back shortly. Maybe that was a shut up and get on with it alarm, Simon, because this video is longer than you intended it to be and people just want you to crack on. Where was I? This book is about all of those things that I mentioned before. However, I only know that from the blurb because 50 pages in, I didn't really understand what was going on, have any real concept of any depths around the characters. And also this world just felt so partially built that I was in, and I flicked to the back and found out that it's the 3rd in a series, and I think that really showed. So for me, this was a no, and it was a real shame because I had read Karen Lord before and I really loved the redemption in Indigo, but yeah, that one was not for me. Then we have Western Lane by Chetna Maru, which sounds odd to say, this book instantly makes me smile, but I do think of this book very fondly. It's not about an easy subject matter, it's about 3 sisters whose mother has died and their father gets them really into squash, the sport, not the fruit, or is it a vegetable? Anyway, I didn't think I was going to like this. Some of the writing in here was so beautiful. There's one scene with one of the sisters on the landing that I will never, ever forget. It's one of my favourite pieces of writing in fiction that I've read in a long time. If we go on the criteria, in terms of writing, excellent writing. Like I said, that page in particular will stay with me forever. Just the image that Chetna Maru created with that, I just thought was utterly beautiful. Originality, I guess it's that thing again where I've seen this sort of storyline done before. I did think it was different with the sport elements. I would say that was really original. And also, I didn't think I was going to enjoy a sport book, but I did, which goes to show that the writing is super duper good, and accessibility completely. So it may therefore be a shock that it's a no, but with a star from me. Although I did really love this, and on a different day, it would be in my shortlist. So yeah, next up we have Night Bloom by Peace Adzo Medi, and this is about 2 cousins in Ghana, and they're born on the same day. They're incredibly close, and then they are basically torn apart, and we follow one of their stories, and then midway we switch. I stopped midway. I kind of felt like I'd read this book before, so that kind of goes against originality. I think it's really important that there are lots of books around the importance of, around the importance of education for young women around the world where society sees that as not being that important. And I thought that was done well here. I also found that with Akorfa, sorry, I should have said the cousins are called Akorfa and Selassie. Akorfa goes to America, and I found the way she writes about the American dream and it not living up to what she expected so well done. But I felt this needed quite an edit. This was another book that felt a bit heavy for me, and I've seen so many people say this is so readable. I didn't really find that in the first half. However, I'm going to give a shout out again to Joseph at Foyle's Cafe, who said he had read it and absolutely loved the second half. So if this gets shortlisted, I will read it to fruition. But for me, sadly, it was a no, because I was quite looking forward to this one. Then penultimately, we have Ordinary Human Failings by Megan Nolan. This was another one that I wasn't sure I was really looking forward to, because I'd heard such mixed things about acts of desperation. However, this story of a family from Ireland living in London in the 1990s, where they're already ostracised, and then the youngest member of the family being seen as a suspect for the death of another child, is just incredible. The characterisation in this book is phenomenal. The way it looks at how people are seen so suspiciously as outsiders, but also the awful ughness of the press, and how the press literally hates working class people, and if they can find someone who's different to pin something on in terms of a story, they will. I thought that was all done phenomenally. In terms of the writing, absolutely excellent. I loved it. In terms of accessibility, I was totally drawn in, lost in the characters, lost in this family who I really came to care about, flaws and all. And then in terms of originality, yes, because I think it does something quite different with what I guess would be seen as a crime novel or a literary thriller, because it is based around a crime, but it's so totally not either of those things, except some points it sort of is. I was just hooked by it, and I found it really difficult to put down. So that's a yes from me, which, yes, that makes my 6th shortlist. But before we go on to those, and I'll hold them up again, and then what I think the judges will pick, here we have A Trace of Sun by Pam Williams. This is in essence, a mother and son story. We meet Scylla, who is going to join her husband in the UK, and she's pregnant with a child he doesn't know about. She's taking, obviously, that baby, because it's in her tummy, along with her second son to join them, but leaving her eldest behind. And there's a bit of a question mark about why there's this weird tension between her husband, and this eldest child. And I enjoyed this. It's another DNF, but it was again a DNF for now, as I guess I didn't feel I was getting anything new, which sounds so harsh, because I guess it is about sometimes there aren't, like I've said before, there's nothing new under the sun, Trace of Sun. But if you're reading something that you've a story that you've read before, you want a different take on it, and I wasn't quite getting this. That said, in terms of writing, I was getting shades of Andrea Levy, which I loved. But yeah, I just felt sometimes it needed a bit of an edit. I would find there were certain repetitive thoughts going on, and that's something that I'm just realising I don't need to know something more than twice maybe in order for it to be, yeah, I get it, you're pointing out this. And I felt that was done a little bit with this one. So again, a no, but one that I would probably head back to at some point. We'll see. I mean, if it's on the shortlist, I certainly will. So there we go. So that means my shortlist are these 6 books. We have In Defence of the Act by Effie Black, The Wren by Anne Enright, Brotherless Night by B.B. Ganeshananthan, Endergoes by Isabella Hammad, 8 Lives of a Century-Old Trickster by Mireille Lee, and Ordinary Human Failings by Megan Nolan. But what do I think the judges will pick? Well, just give me 1 second, caller, and I'll be right back. I'm doing these in side order, I should say. Right, I'm back. So I think that the judges will pick Soldier Sailor by Claire Kilroy, Brotherless Night by B.B. Ganeshananthan, Mireille Lee's 8 Lives of a Century-Old Trickster, Megan Nolan's Ordinary Human Failings, Isabella Hammad's Enter Ghost, and Peace Adzo Medi's Night Bloom. That is my guess. I don't know why I think it's different from mine, I just do. And I don't know why I think it's that. I did write a different list earlier, it could change at any point, but that is what I'm going with right now. What will it be? We will find out tomorrow, and at 8 AM I will be sharing what the shortlist is and what my thoughts are on it. I hope you enjoyed that. Sorry it was a bit longer than intended. Always the way with me. I'd love to know what you make of my shortlist, what books you would put on your shortlist. Let's have a chat about all the books in the comments down below. If you would like more content from me, you can find my Patreon, you can find my Instagram, you can find my wishlist and all of the different linky rink dinks down below. And I will see you tomorrow to chat about the shortlist and what my thoughts are for it. I'll see you then.